Hello, everyone, and welcome to Something to Talk About Live. My name is Liz Owen, and I am the Director of Communications for PFLAG National. My pronouns are she, her. It's really good to have you with us this week for another great conversation. We do indeed have something to talk about. So let me bring in my friend and colleague, our Director of Learning and Inclusion, Jean Marie Nevada.
Hello, Liz. How are you?
I am just fine, thank you. How are you, my friend?
I am doing well and feeling a little bit unprepared because we were just having so much fun getting ready to start the show. I can't stop giggling, which is always a problem.
Well, keep up the good humor and the laughter through difficult conversations. It always helps.
Thank you, Liz. We'll see you later. Hey, everybody. My name is Jean Marie Nevada. My pronouns are she and her, or if you speak Spanish, ella. And I am the Director of Learning and Inclusion at PFLAG National. And every single week for over a year, we've been getting together on Thursday afternoons to talk about something relevant in the LGBTQ space. Every single week, we pick an article that has some interesting topic, write some questions, and then we invite a few friends in to have the conversation with us. And you are here, so we are hoping that you will participate in the chat. So this week's article you can access by going to straightforequality.org/discussion series. And that is where this week's article is, which is from Harper's Bazaar, written by Leah Johnson. And it was called "After I Came Out, My Mother Left Our Church to Fight for Queer Youth." And it's a pretty amazing article about her journey with her mom, about coming out and what it meant in their own faith context. One of the lines in it that I kept reading over and over again as I was getting ready today was that Leah Johnson writes of her mother, "She knew enough to use her Bible to immerse us both in acceptance instead of hate." But it was a journey. It was a learning journey. And I want to have a conversation about what that journey looks for a lot of moms, especially as we start looking towards Mother's Day this weekend, and for families. And for that, I always get to invite in friends. And this week, I have two people who are just so amazing. So let's bring in this week's guests. First, long-term queer faith advocate and just educator extraordinaire, Lisbeth Melendez-Rivera. Hello, Lisbeth.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
I am so excited that you're here. And let's also bring in, as we've decided, intergalactic treasure and mom, Debbie Jackson.
Hi, thank you so much for inviting me today.
Oh, thank you, Debbie. And really, we will take anybody with a title as good as intergalactic treasure. So we're just going to all roll with that. So I want to talk about this article because both of you have such incredible faith journeys and you're doing such great work in these spaces, talking to families. So I'll just start, and maybe Debbie, you can go first, and then Lisbeth, I'd like to hear from you. When you read this article, how did it make you feel? Did any of this resonate with you? Are these stories that mirror anything you've gone through, or the stories that you are hearing out there as you are doing this work?
Yeah, I resonated with the story both as being the mom who has to change their perspective, but also with a little bit of jealousy about having a mom who was able to look at their faith again and come out on the other side as a better person who's supporting the LGBT community. I grew up Southern Baptist, and my family is still very much Southern Baptist. So for myself, I don't think that I had the kind of struggle that a lot of other people from that faith background had. I saw the pain in my child. I saw the joy when she was affirmed. My best friend since forever is gay, and it was so obvious to all of us that he was, and he was still so loved and wonderful. And I never thought for a moment of judging him for who he was. So for me to accept my transgender child was very easy. It's another part of who she is. I feel like I get to see the best part of her. I get to see her spirit, and that's what my faith tells me I'm supposed to be looking for, not the shell of who she is, but the spirit of who she is. But then at the same time, my family has not been that open and accepting. My mom actually said that if she believed what she had been taught at church about LGBT people was wrong, she would possibly have to then re-examine everything that she had been taught by the church, and she wasn't willing to do that. So for me, I really do wish more people would be open to learning where maybe they've been taught something that's not true, and that they would look deeply inside themselves and their faith system and come to terms with some things being wrong and influenced by man. And again, going back to, just the heart of what I think all religion is supposed to teach us, which is to love one another.
Yeah, and I think that is, you mentioned something I think we're going to come back to, which is the enormous role that our faith lives play in many people's existence, that it isn't just what you do on the weekend, that it does influence your complete worldview, your complete network of support and family and social circles. So it's not just a matter of sort of stepping away from one thing, but it could literally feel like an entire life change. And I think that's a piece that a lot of people miss in this conversation, if that's not sort of their experience. Lisbeth, talk about the article and what you felt in it and what you saw in it as you were reading.
So there's a part of me that, in reading the article, went back to my own, coming out story. Back in the day, 30 years ago. But I don't think I lost count. It might be 30. Anyway, my mom affirmed the fact that I was queer by making a phone call to my home, and my phone message machine, back then there was no voicemail. That's how long ago it was. Said, welcome to the offices of the National, Bi, Lesbian, and Gay Liberation March on Washington. And if you want to leave a message for so-and-so and Lisbeth, please press 2. We had a fancy machine. It had more than one option. All I heard, I got to message 25, and all I heard was like, ay, Dios mío. And the bang of the phone hanging, and having to call my mom and saying, so I heard your message, because it was a message. She hung up. And we had a conversation about, so just for a second, let me be clear. I was raised Catholic in a Latino family. So we are Roman Apostolic Catholics. My parents still to this day go to church. My dad goes to church every day, gets up at 4 o'clock in the morning and go to Vespers every day. And so I knew the impact that this would have in affirmation. We had a long conversation. It probably, my mom took a decision that was very hurtful to me. And in many ways, what it said was, she stopped blessing me. So in Latino culture, when you take a look at things, like you begin and end almost every single conversation with, hola mami, ¿cómo está? Bendición. And your elder, not just your mother, but your elder would say, Dios te bendiga, God bless you, may the Virgin walk with you, something to the effect that signifies that you are worthy of the divine. My mom denied me that for 6 months. At the end of, and it stopped because I went home after a breakup, and I wasn't exposed from my family. My parents were beautiful enough to still open their home to me. And then I had a conversation with my parents about what it meant for another friend of theirs who had rejected their child and whose child had passed away in the middle of the AIDS epidemic. And my mother literally looked at me in the face and said, I just need you to know that while you and I might disagree at times, you will always be my child. I will always love you. You are my blood. You are my flesh. You are my soul. You are my spirit. You are my hero. We will figure this out. So it wasn't the accepting all of a sudden, yes, there's no problem, but it's been a 30+ year journey of conversations that incorporates the divine into our lives. And it goes so true to the question of, because they didn't leave the church like this mother did, because my parents saw a place for them to grow the church, to fix the church, right? And to their credit, they've tried really hard, but we are Catholics, and so we've never said the earth is round. We just stopped saying it was flat. So we have a little bit of issues, but that they've never denied who I am. And as I enter, as I am now on my doctoral studies for ministry, that they've continued to affirm who I am with the full understanding that if everything is created, if humanity is created in the divine's image, then I am a huge part of the divine, And so every conversation that I had, the reflection of this article for me was a reflection of that statement. Everything that humanity is a reflection of the divine, for good or for bad. And the divine loves us. And it also knows enough to leave us alone sometimes. And it's given us the gift of discernment. And so my parents have discerned that they love their child and the divine, and therefore they're one and the same.
Thank you. A discernment. I think that is the process that so many people end up having to go through to understand that, which I think brings us to that journey. So what does that journey look like? And obviously it looks different for everybody. Debbie, I'd like to hear from you because you talk to a lot of parents who are going through this. You have used your story as a vehicle to get conversations going. What do you see these journeys looking like, these faith journeys for so many parents?
Yeah, apologies for the cranky old dog in the background. She's mad about it too. I think for a lot of people, it's almost like going through all the stages of grief. You know, there's fear that they're going to get something wrong. I see so many people who say, what if I'm leading my child down a path that's condemning them for eternity? And I mean, that's a huge weight. Never mind that you might be supporting someone in changing their body in a way that is a little bit different, but to think about eternity on top of that really terrifies a lot of people. But once a parent gets to the point of just saying, I love my child, I want to be there for my child, and then they try to approach their pastor, their minister, someone to get the support from their church and say, this is where we are as a family, can you support us too? If it doesn't go well, they will end up really angry. And there's so much pain. And I understand too, from just speaking to LGBT adults, that there is so much pain caused by churches and religion, and the families feel that as well. I've known people who were pastors. They had taught Sunday school for 20 years. They played the piano at their church, and then suddenly they found that they were no longer welcome there, that the church was asking them, choose us or your child. And that's an incredibly painful decision to make. And that a church would ever actually assume that a parent would choose them over their child is astonishing to me. But I've seen people do that too. Just because, again, the idea of questioning everything that they know and have found comfort in can be really difficult. So there are a lot of people that get to the point of just being so hurt that they will end up rejecting church. They will reject faith completely. And I try to remind people all the time that being LGBT is not a choice. The denomination, the faith system that you follow is. There are a lot out there that are affirming. You don't have to give up your beliefs completely. You can walk away from one church and walk into the doors and the loving arms of another. So there's no reason to think that it's a binary system. You're either faith-based or not. So I think sometimes you have to get through all those levels of grief, though. First, you have to feel the sadness, and then you have to feel the anger, and then you have to, become resolved that this is the way that church is, before you can get back to a place of acceptance and move forward with finding a place that does feel like home, and that embraces love versus fear, and acceptance versus denial of people and rejection of people. But it's out there. So I just encourage people mainly to go through. You have to go through the process, but there is something positive on the other side. And yes, it could be the rainbow. It's the rainbow on the other side. You just have to get to the other side of that storm.
Thank you. Lisbeth, that actually brings up something that I didn't necessarily think I was going to talk about, but I think we should talk about, which is this journey can cause a lot of damage and a lot of pain. And you and I have known each other for years. And I feel like one of the reasons that we became friends so easily is because we were both people who wanted to stay in our faith spaces. And it's a conversation you and I have been having for many, many years, even though we were hurt. How do you talk to people who are LGBTQ, and let's admit their families, about navigating this hurt, and how do they work through it? And are you seeing people more successful in this? Do you think there's more hope now? Are things getting better?
Let's start with the myth that everything faith is anti-LGBTQ and everything LGBTQ is anti-faith. And I want to put emphasis on the myth. And if we start from that premise, we understand that progress can be made. And so, but we are, as Debbie said, hurt people. The idea that because we are queer, we are anti-divine is preposterous. Just because we are one of the wonderful variety of things God created, just because they decided that they were going to make some of us pink and some of us, not, alluding to, the original queer colors. It's hard for people to understand. And when humans, men in particular, use that to filter who has access to the divine, it's incredibly painful and hurtful. When I walked back through the doors of the church, and Jimmer, you and I have talked about this. One of the things that I realize that I speak to people all the time is that you have to take a deeper look, even if you decide to stay within what is seen as a hurtful congregation. And you know what? I will throw a Catholic church to a Southern Baptist one any day, and we will, as to who is more exclusive, right? But in the Catholic Church, one of the things that I realized was that we actually live in 3 churches. And I think this is emblematic of many churches, many denominations, regardless if they're Christian or not. And that is that you have the hierarchy, those with the big titles, the cardinals, the bishops, the apostles, the whatever people decide to call themselves to give themselves power over people. You have the middle management, which is usually the ministers, the reverends, the nuns, and then you have the pews. You have the people who actually live and lean into their faith every day. I, as a Catholic, tend to understand that the hierarchy, the upper hierarchy of my church is just that. It's a bunch of men sitting in their thrones, losing touch with reality and humanity, with messages that sometimes get filtered by people, their middle management. But the people in the pews love me. In the United States, almost 70% of all Catholics approve of the recognition of LGBTQ relationships. They approve of the recognition of us as human beings worth of respect every day. So if you can engage in a conversation with someone to say whatever it is that you need to do to heal faithfully, to create an intentional community around you that respects your beliefs and lifts your spirits and your belief in the divine, then you're going to be okay. And to go back to what Debbie was saying, we have over 75,000 congregations in the United States. I can assure you, you will find one that will embrace you in your entirety and will sustain the same beliefs you were brought up with and shed the Bible as a tool of hate, but embrace the instrument of love that it is. Or the Torah, or the Quran, or, the sacred, scriptures, sacred, theology. All of those things will find people who will use them as tools to sustain their power, and their power remains. Who amongst you I can reject so that I can say I have power over you? And there's a group of people that say, you know what? That's nice. Thank you. I love my child. I love my fellow human being. And I'm going to embrace him with the same fervor that I embrace everything that is divine and godlike around me. And, God will say, hey, there's not so much more tweaking left to do here. I think I've sort of kind of done my job, but I'll remain vigilant. And when it fails, I will bring a flower up, I will bring a breath of fresh air, and I will create a new ado. And we know, in Christianity, we sort of kind of know the wrath of the divine because it's what's been highlighted, in history. And a lot of the times when you really hear the whispers behind the words, you see the beautiful love that the divine has always expressed for us. And if we can get queer people to just pause and meditate on that, we'll be okay. Those are the conversations that you try to have, with folks. Not easy because there's a lot of healing to do. So pastoral care is super important.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's really difficult. I found myself growing up, I'm Catholic. My mother is a former Catholic sister, a Dominican. And I was so lucky in that I found that it was rare and that it never crossed my mind that God was not okay with me as a queer person. And I give my mom a lot of credit for that because of the example that she set. And when I hear people talk about feeling isolated from God or even separated from God, it is the worst violence I can possibly imagine because I cannot imagine what that experience must feel like. And I'm so grateful it was never mine. But we look at so much pain. So Debbie, I want to, because I'm looking in the chat just a little bit as we're talking, and I'm seeing a lot of people saying, well, how do I make things better for myself? So could you give a little bit of advice or talk a little bit about of some of the things that have worked for you and that you see, whether it is resources that you would point to, or is it sort of strategies that you have about how to reconcile? I'd like to give people some stuff to think about as we head out towards questions today.
Mm-hmm. Sure. I love to plug the book by Justin Tanis. It used to be Transgendered. They've updated the title, thankfully. But that was one of the very first things that I ever read. And the way that the creation is described in there, because, I read it every single day in comment sections, God created man and woman and all of that. But the way that it's described, that creation is night and day, but there's also dusk and dawn. There is such fluidity in everything. It's not binary. And the same thing with land and sea. The tides change where that edge is every single time, all throughout the day. So man and woman, there's also fluidity there, and there's so much more than the binary. So we understand, looking at the physical world around us, that the world is not binary, even when we read two words with the word and in between. But suddenly for man and woman, we can't see that. That was such a profound moment for me that I always go back to that. That's the first thing that I say to anyone, is go grab this book. You need to read it. There are many others that are similar right now too, but that's the one for me that personally affected me. I also still sing hymns to myself, and it's kind of painful because I live where I hear a church and the church bells 4 times a day. That's how I tell time. And that church brought in someone who wanted to talk about the trans menace on society and how it was going to ruin things. So it's painful when I hear these church bells 4 times a day. But like one of my favorite hymns, the first words, I walk through the garden alone, but and there can be a feeling of being alone, but we're not. We have the Creator with us. We have the divine within us at all times. And I try to remember that, because not having family around, not having support, it felt very lonely. And yet I remember, I was taught that God is with me at all times. I don't have to feel alone. I don't have to feel scared. I am going to be able to handle what is, put in my path. And for me, that means loving my child. I'm not alone. I have found a community. I have found my chosen family. And I think that's just one of the resources is find those things from your faith that always gave you comfort, and find the comfort in them today, whatever that is. If it was your morning prayer, if it's a certain book, if it was certain music, there's no reason for that to be taken away from you. If it gave you comfort before, it should give you comfort now.
I love that. I love that. Thank you. And as you were talking about thinking about hymns in my head, I'm suddenly thinking about all of the things I grew up singing in church. And Be Not Afraid is the one that always comes back to me. And I always remind myself of that one. Of course, it makes me think of funerals too. So let's not go there. What recommendations would you have? Either resources or sort of that mind shift that we can start doing?
So this might surprise people, but I'm going to refer people back to the Bible. There are over 35,000 verses in the Bible. 6, maybe 9 tops are used with scalpel precision to excise us from the church. And I'm not saying that the book is not problematic. Let me just be very clear. There are some sections that are really problematic, besides the clover verses. But you have to read this book with a critical mind. Debbie, you talk about the creation story, and always my first question, like I almost jumped right in and said, but which creation story? There's 3 of them. In one, we're equals. In the other, we're made, like we female identified people are made from a rib. In the last one, there was the failure of Lilith, and now, like you said, well, I was going to scratch that and create Eve. I was like, okay, so which one is it? So that demonstrates the fragility and the variety of stories that the Bible, the men who put the Bible together, content with. There are 2 Exodus stories. I mean, there's plenty, like just pick your path, find it. I want to go back to reiterating, the Bible is a book. It's really an instrument of love. That so many times is used as the tool of hate. That's not the way it should be. However, I will say this. I think that activist theologian by Robin Henderson Espinosa. I think of folks who are embedded in thinking about what the Creator, what the divine has for us. And then, of course, there's the resources that organizations like PFLAG have created that really will guide you through that process. I was an essential part of a guide that was created by a former LGBTQ Latinx organization in collaboration with other organizations that really help Latinx families, reconcile what it meant to be of faith, to be Latinx, to be, same gender loving, to be, what your gender identity was. So come back to the PFLAG website, take a look at the resources they've put together. I find that to be one of the best resources you can have at hand. Because Debbie and I can go through I wish I would turn my camera away, but I have an entire library of books that I can show you on queer liberation theology or anything of the sort. And that still will never equal the breadth and the richness of the writings out there that will help you get through this journey from the most outstanding of people to those who are still struggling. And it's okay to struggle. The edge of the shore will change every day. It's okay to struggle. Just always remain in this side of love, because if you love your child, you will embrace your child. That is what the divine has asked you to do. That is what the Creator put that being in, near you for, regardless of if that is your genetic child or not. If you are a parent, you are called to love that child, not to reject it, not to send it to the wolves. And as much as you think you might be protecting that child by rejecting it, the harm is much greater, far greater, than embracing that child and saying, we will struggle through this together because the divine has put us together to love one another.
And I think that that's what it comes down to. I remember many years ago, I met a woman who very proudly talked about her dead gay son, very proudly. And in the name of Jesus was happy about it because she thought it made him no longer gay. And I remember thinking it was the most profane, anti-Christian thing I had ever heard in my entire life. And to this day, it still is. And I thought, how dare you do that in the name of God? And there's entirely too much of that. And it's devastating. Lisbeth, Debbie, as usual, every week, I wish we had hours to do this, but we have to wrap up. I want to thank you both. I would actually love to do this conversation again, because I think there's so much more that can be said. If you looked in the comments, there have been so many comments. People have been talking about their own experiences. Thank you both. You are changing the world, and I think we're really saving souls in the work that you are both doing. So thank you so much for everything. We appreciate you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you, everybody. It is another wrap on the week. That goes so fast. I am so grateful for all these brilliant, amazing, talented, and incredibly brave people around us who are doing this really heavy lifting. Thank you for everybody who was part of the chat. This was a really emotional one. Every single week we wrap up the same way. We remind you to run fast, laugh hard, and be kind. Also get vaccinated, and please keep wearing your masks when appropriate. Thank you for being here. We will be back next week with something else to talk about. Same bat time, same bat channel. So see you next week, everybody. Bye.